Now, this essentially could be 2008 all over again. There could be a new credit crunch in emerging markets as interest rates rise across the world. That, at least, is a warning from the International Monetary Fund in a series of reports out on Wednesday. The fund is warning governments in emerging markets to prepare for a rise in corporate failures, as businesses, it says, will find it hard to meet higher borrowing costs. Now, keep in mind the Federal Reserve held rates in a meeting earlier this month, but it's likely to raise them in December. It's a question of when, not if. According to the IMF's data, Asian firms have the highest debt levels. Businesses in Turkey, Chile and Brazil have also ramped up their debts and are vulnerable to increased rates, especially given the depreciation in their currencies. Economists at the IMF argue that borrowing levels rose mainly due to international factors like low interest rates and quantitative easing by central banks in US, Japan and in Europe as well. Let's over live to New York. Chitra Newbat is there with more data on this story. Chitra, based on the data that the IMF presented, most of the EM corporate debt of concern is being held in China. What parts of the economy there are of most concern?
Rama, it's the Chinese services economy that's the greatest at risk here. Economic growth has been driven by services and government spending in that area, especially IT, banks, telecoms, insurance. But energy, materials, commodities, that's significant to China and the world, so there's also exposure there.
The fund also pointed out that the collection of data on foreign currency exposure among firms, and I'm quoting them here, needs improvement. Now, if that's the case, wouldn't it be fair to argue that this figure of $18 trillion in corporate debt is really just an underestimate?
Rama, that's absolutely right. That figure very much could be underestimated for a few reasons. One, accuracy and completeness of the data, not only in foreign currency exposure, but in the actual debt balances and valuations. That leads to number two, accounting. While accounting and generally accepted accounting principles are the language of financial record keeping worldwide, there are many interpretations. So how debt is classified and valued may be different in each emerging market, also underestimating that $18 trillion figure. And three, volatility. Markets are very volatile, affecting the valuation of currencies and underlying assets. With debt, there's often a lot of collateral involved, so that impacts the value of the debt. So the volatile stock and bond markets are also leaving loan valuations fluctuating.
Indeed. 2008 also had another boogeyman in the room, derivative instruments. Those essentially amplify the effect of the financial crisis many times over. Are we facing a similar problem this time round?
Rama, that boogeyman has not gone away. Derivatives, by their inherent nature, are risky and complex. Even the experts don't fully understand what's appropriate and how to value some of those instruments, especially credit default swaps. This contributed to the financial crisis as people didn't know they were holding assets at low values or junk. So if the appropriate controls and monitoring aren't done when derivatives are used, like how they're accounted for and hedged and how they're marked to market value, this can be an increasing risk.
Indeed. One final question for you, Chitra. Beyond reforming how to handle insolvency and bankruptcies, what else can emerging markets do to mitigate the damage from a wave of corporate defaults?
Rama, governments, business players, they can do due diligence upfront and during the entire process. Regardless of how highly rated a corporate may be, due diligence must be done on the quality of the counterparty in a debt transaction, that counterparty's collateral, assets, valuation, what its business activities are, and if there's concentration risk, too much exposure to corporates in one or a handful of sectors and regions. And if you think a corporate is at the risk of default, then be proactive about that loan restructuring. Citigroup recently says that the loan quality in many markets around the world is deteriorating, and it raises concerns about being able to get paid in the future. So don't wait for some magical government bailout of a sector.
Indeed, we'll have to leave it there for the time being. Chitra Newbat there live in New York.